Hello and welcome to Question Time, September 2021. I very much apologize for being a couple of minutes late. Hopefully, those of you that have been waiting haven't been waiting too long. As we do here, please confirm that you can hear my voice on the microphone when you get the chance. But otherwise, the reason I was late is because, as you might have seen on the internet elsewise in the last couple of days, or even the last 24 hours, there has been a legal brouhaha about who owns the intellectual property rights to some important Marvel characters. And so a lot of you contacted me in the DMs and my social media, and I really wanted to get a video out, even on a Saturday when I wasn't planning to, about that particular topic. So I literally finished the video at about 10 a.m., got that all saved up, and I will be working on the upload after this question time period is done. Unfortunately, it also means I wasn't able to do my nice, fancy version of the questions from patrons. I very much apologize for that, patrons. I'm going to cover a few more questions as recompense for that from those of you that posted those questions. I really do want to apologize for that, but I thought it was for a good cause, more virtual legality. I figured that's why you're here. That's why you're supporting the channel on Patreon. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with the channel, don't know what we're doing here, we do a monthly question and answer session that gets patron questions answered first. There's a tier about question time. The patrons make this kind of video possible. And they get to ask questions, a number of which I will answer at the top, usually with kind of shiny slides here with the Virtual Legality logo, everything else on it. That won't happen this month. I do, again, apologize. But after that, we'll do community questions. We'll talk about whatever else you want. Obviously, a pretty big month in Virtual Legality. We had some kind of, 2.5-hour episode that went out there, and that was covered by, I think, every journalistic outlet that I saw. The channel, Virtual Legality, everything else, got a lot of free press on that video, and thank you to everyone that helped share it around. We can talk about aspects of that. We can talk about aspects of that case. But that's how we have this working. That's what we do every month. If you do want to flag me, especially when we move into the community questions side of things in this video, please use @Hoeg Law or, God forbid, a super chat to help support the channel. Everything is appreciated there, but that's how I can see them a little bit better. Otherwise, have the conversations you want to have with each other. This is, I think, a pretty good community we're building and a pretty cool space of people to talk to. Now, with that all said, let's answer some questions from some patrons. So, number one, are you for or against pineapple pizza being a crime against humanity? Now, that's almost a double negative. Am I for it being a crime? No. As we like to say in Virtual Legality, you got to be very careful about what you make a crime. You have to want to have the cops come in and break down a door and otherwise throw somebody in a cage to make something a crime, even if you don't think that's what you did in the law. So I don't think pineapple pizza should be a crime against humanity instead of a legal one. Maybe. I'm not a big fan of fruity tastes on my pizza. I'm also not a big fan of fruity tastes in my ice cream. I know that's something that'll get a lot of folks upset at me, but in general, the creaminess of the ice cream doesn't go so much to me with a raspberry type flavoring. So I don't tend to like that. But as we say here, reasonable minds can differ, and it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people do like it. So I'm against it being a crime against humanity. I'm all for people liking what they like, but it's not me. What is your favorite law quote? I'll have to come back to that one. I think my favorite quote in general about the law is probably the "man for all seasons" type quote, which you've seen me use a number of times on the channel, which is essentially, in spirit, be very careful about deciding to interpret laws in a way that you think helps you be righteous or against something that you find evil, or maybe even the vast majority of the populace finds evil, because when you take down those laws no longer protect you. And I think you've seen that as a through line for what we've talked about in Virtual Legality, certainly with Epic versus Apple, which I imagine will come up today, which is the notion of, yeah, you can be against Apple. Apple does a bunch of crazy things. And I think there are a number of good cases that could be brought against that company. I just don't think Epic brought one. So I would say don't cast down all the laws to get at the devil, but cast down the laws when they make sense or when they need to be reformed. We talk about that a lot in this space as well. So apologies, I don't have the quote at my fingertips, but it's, excuse me, it's basically that notion Don't just reinterpret things, cast down laws to get at what you think is righteous, because it might be used against you or people that you don't think are deserving of that kind of treatment at some point in the future. Would you do a follow-up video on your Are All Digital Stores Engaged in Fraud video covering the lawsuit against Apple about buying not so perpetual licenses to digital content? I might. That's going to be a continuing kind of theme, I think, for the next few years. And if you aren't familiar with that video, it's VL453. You can check it out. It essentially was a suit and complaint that was brought up for the buy button on, I think it was like Voodoo and Apple Store and those kinds of things, but would apply to anything that you or I might regularly deal with in terms of video games. We talk about the fact that software is licensed and not sold, and yet you still generally press a button that says purchase or buy. Now, in legal terms, what you're buying is a license and not the underlying intellectual property. But that's angels on the head of a pin for the modern day consumer, for the most part, that aren't regularly spending time in virtual legality, as wrong as that might be. And so I do think that there is a kernel of truth in saying buy and purchase are confusing to someone that doesn't understand that what you're getting is a license with restrictions on it. And I do think that'll come up again. So when it does, as we do in virtual legality, we try to take the news of the day and the things that are happening and treat them with whatever kind of legal lens we can to analyze things that I think are interesting in contract law or business law or statutory copyright law, as we'll see in the Spider-Man video that'll go up later today. But we generally use that framework so that we're not just updating old things. Obviously, I say this as the owner of a 56 video playlist on Epic versus Apple, but that's generally how we arrange things. If something else pops up that makes us want to update those, I never want to waste anybody's time in virtual legality, so I will definitely do a follow-up at that point in time. What was your brother's reaction to hearing you wanted to start a YouTube channel, and what is his take on the channel now? Now, if you aren't familiar with my brother, I can't blame you. We do have a series called Two Hoegs Are Better Than One, Thabto, in which my brother, who is a game developer at Activision, or more specifically a subsidiary of Activision, appears, and we talk about game-related things. He's one of the smartest people I know, and his reaction to hearing I wanted to start a YouTube channel was essentially the same reaction that the rest of my family had, which is, what are you, crazy? You know, at that point in time, we're talking about 2018, I'd been doing corporate law for 13 years. I'd worked at some of the biggest companies in Michigan, some of the biggest law firms in the country, and people were asking me why. And part of that was from some of the things that you might already know about. I was doing Help Us Out Hoeg for Easy Allies. I was regularly appearing on the radio in marketing capacity for the firm. I like to talk, as you can probably already tell, and I thought I had something to offer. At the same time, I had other people that were clients of mine dealing with YouTube and Twitch and other things, and I wanted to know exactly what they were looking at in terms of analytics and data and what that relationship with one of these big companies looked like. And so I thought it was a good idea, and so that's what I did. But my brother and my wife and some other folks are like, you're crazy. One, nobody's ever going to listen to that. People want to watch small kids open boxes of toys, not listen to a lawyer talk about these issues. And two, it's going to take so much work and be so much time that you aren't going to stick with it. You're going to have to do other things. That life is going to intervene, and to some extent it has. But one of the very first things I tried to solve for was, how can I make videos what I would consider quickly, 3 or 4 hours, rather than 8 to 12 or 14, and getting that time period down was so important to making it work within my business day and my parental life and everything else. And that's how we got to now. What is his take on the channel now? He's proud of me. He thinks the channel's going places. He keeps asking me when we're going to get $100,000 in one of those plaques. I say, you know, we're a long way away from that, but I think it's a possibility, especially if you all keep telling your friends that we're having these conversations here. But I'm proud of it as well. I love doing it. As you can probably tell, we're on episode 560 something of virtual legality alone, with another 100 videos on different topics in the channel. And so I don't think I'm going anywhere anytime soon, but that's because I like working. I like seeing those numbers go up. I like talking to more people. And I really do love doing it. And I think I'm doing good work. Hopefully that's the case. But I think everybody now in my family is pretty proud of what we're done. And I've heard everybody, I get this comment a lot. When is Tom coming back? Which, one, makes me feel like you're here just to wait for Tom to come back. But two, he wants to come back. It's been a trying year across the world for really everybody. But he wants to come back. It's just not a good time. I'm pretty sure he will definitely do a 2021 best of games debate with me again. That was very well received. A lot of people commented on that. A lot of people asked for it again. So I think we'll probably do our top 10 games of 2021 again. And then I will try to get him on a regular schedule with Thabto for 2022. But that's basically where we're at right there. Are there any unwritten rules or items considered to be a professional courtesy when dealing with other lawyers? Some of these are written, right? One of the things you might know if you've ever worked with a lawyer before, whether it's in unfortunate circumstances or otherwise, is that lawyers can't talk to other principals, the other side, directly if they're represented by a lawyer. And this comes up a lot in my conversations with clients, which is you want to say, hey, can you just ask Bob on the other side something? And say, no, I have to go through his lawyer. Basically, it's set up so that the lawyers only talk to each other, and then the principals can talk to each other on whatever they're concerned with. But otherwise, you're going up to your lawyer, I'm going across to their lawyer is going down to their client, so that the lawyers never talk directly to the other side's client, or what I use the term principal. And that comes up a lot in negotiations because some of the time the strategy is, hey, it'll be better potentially. You might have a better chance of getting this term or this term removed if you go principal to principal. You guys are in a business transaction. You're already friends. Presumably you think there's going to be something that's valuable in this relationship in the future. Go talk to them. Go to the bar. Do whatever it is. And don't involve the lawyers because, as I also say, lawyers have a tendency to escalate things. We are supposed to be zealous advocates of the positions that our clients hold. And zealous advocacy can make many different forms of appearance. Some lawyers like to be raging assholes. I know I don't swear on this channel very often, but it's true. Some lawyers like to be passive aggressive. Some lawyers do other things. I tend to start out with honey and say, look, let's get this done on an agreeable basis. And the more agreeable we can be, the better it is going to be for our clients. Let's not negotiate semicolons and commas if they otherwise work mostly. And let's get down to the crux of whatever the matter before us is. Other people take different tacks. None of those are wrong. Everybody has to find their voice as their own lawyer when you get out into practice. But the unwritten rule is written for the most part. I can't talk to your client. You can't talk to mine. However, a lot of lawyers violate that and then say, oopsie. So it's a matter of dealing with that as well. How many reams of paper do you go through in a year? Less than you might think. My practice, especially when I went out on my own, created Hoeg Law, was designed around less overhead, less cost and expense. So I try to not use that much paper. And a lot of deals, multiple millions of dollars, $20 million deals, higher, can get done essentially in PDF format with DocuSign or electronic signatures with nobody ever appearing in the room. There are no longer a need for conference tables and big handshakes, although sometimes, especially if you're going to spend a lot of money, clients still want to do that. And clients still love a good closing dinner, which are, 4-hour, 6-hour affairs celebrating whatever just happened, in which you eat expensively and drink more expensively. Where could one find articles, videos, posts, etc. with your participation outside of your YouTube channel, Twitter account, etc.? Now, that's a great question, and it actually exposes what I think is a hole in the way that I'm currently treating my content. We have been very, very fortunate to be quoted in a lot of places, to appear on a lot of other channels, to have a lot of stories done either about us, using the videos as a baseline. And so there's a lot of places, PC Gamer, IGN, GameSpot, Kotaku, Polygon, everybody has quoted us. We've got some in the New York Times and Washington Post and things like that. One thing I would like to do potentially, especially in kind of 2022 area, is consider whether there shouldn't be a virtual legality website or a Hoeg Law YouTube channel website, or even a tab on the law firm site that gathers these things for you. Not just for you, but to show off to potential clients and things as an authoritative source on various questions like this. So gathering that is one thing that I intend to do. Certainly the option that you have is if you search for Hoeg Law, Richard Hoeg, virtual legality, you'll find a lot of those quotes. It really just depends on what people used in terms of describing me. But you can check those things out in various places, and I think you'll be surprised at how many places they appear. We've been very fortunate. Again, I've been blessed in that avenue. I didn't know you also read Ask a Game Dev. Yeah, I follow them on Twitter. Is there any other interesting sources of regular information of a similar sort that you could advise? So I think you see me reference a number of folks. Obviously, you can tell I use Twitter to kind of coordinate a lot of my news sources and a lot of my content from those people. I don't recommend Twitter for your daily healthy living in terms of your psychology, but it's a great place to kind of coordinate resources. And there are a couple of folks that I really like. Their Game Over 30 is doing a lot of analytical discussion of the business. Dom's Playing, I think you saw me reference in an earlier video, maybe even the last week, is doing a lot of financial analysis. He also has his own website where he does the occasional video game review, talks about the industry at large. I like those. Ask a Game Dev is great. Although it's interesting, it literally is Ask a Game Dev, so occasionally they bump against legal issues, and I pop in, I comment, and I say, yeah, there's this kind of small change that I would make to that description and that kind of thing. Not that I'm a game dev, and I would never claim to be, but that the confluence of development and business and law sometimes has little things that are different from that score. And so we regularly interact. I think we both follow each other. But I think you see those things. I obviously also recommend a lot of news sources. I generally say I follow Fox and Vox on Twitter, not because I think any of them are right, but because it's useful to see all sorts of different things. So in gaming, I follow Kotaku and Polygon and GameSpot and IGN and everywhere else, regardless of how you might feel about their articles. And sometimes on Twitter, I comment on some iffy headlines from one or more of them. But I always recommend more information, better information, figuring things out for yourself. Obviously, Virtual Legality, the premise of a lot of what we do here is taking a bunch of different sources, hopefully synthesizing it for you in a way that makes sense. And I do see you super chats. I just want to finish up with the Patreon questions, so thank you so much for those. I will definitely be getting to those questions in just a minute. But that's really what I look for when I'm following things. So I recommend it. You can also go, and I think it's a playlist that I don't talk about a lot, but I think it's on the front page of the channel. You'll see something called, I think it's Hoeg Law Crossovers, something along those lines, where you'll see me appearing in other places. And those other places are often ones that I can recommend for you checking out if you're interested in those questions. Obviously, the one thing that doesn't appear there that you probably already aware of is I am a paid contributor of Last Stand Media, which is Colin Moriarty's website, and I do appear on his channel talking about primarily legal issues a lot, but those are behind a paywall, which I apologize for. That's the way he organizes his videos. And that has been good to talk to a new audience. And I think we'll continue to do that, but you don't get that kind of crossover activity. I don't put those in the playlist because they're not outside of the paywall. So I do apologize for that. As a parent, what interests of your kids could indicate you that jurisprudence might be interesting to them? What preferences in specific subjects, classes, and after-class activities could serve as such indicators? Well, that's interesting. I think the thing that people say in pop culture so often is that they like to argue, right? They're arguers, and so they should be lawyers. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Sometimes kids just like to argue. But certainly I can talk about my own background. I was always very interested in business and economics and going around and trying to figure out how the world worked. Why was gas costing that much today, and why did it cost that much yesterday? And what does that mean? How does that work? How does gas get under the gas station? And I was always interested in that. How do you decide why a stop sign is where it is? And I can't promise you that that leads to lawyering necessarily, but going to law school and the practice of law is, as you could probably see in Virtual Legality, the concept of kind of tearing down the matrix and seeing the rules and the contracts and the relationships and how they work, how they influence people. And to me, my background of having a degree in economics and a law degree is perfect for what that is, right? That it's the economics that mixes with the law. The law sets the rules. That sets the incentives. The incentives establish the economics, and that trickles down to everything that happens in your day-to-day life. And the reason Virtual Legality exists is I was doing that with things that I was otherwise interested in. How did this video game acquisition occur? Who does own Spider-Man and why? What do those contracts do? And because I'm a guy that likes to read articles and research and figure things out, that became Virtual Legality. So one thing that you might flag are folks that are really interested in the way the world works around them, whether that's political science or economics or history or something else. All of those might lead to law, and all of those might lead to a different place. but that's what worked for me. I was very interested in how the world worked. And those are our Patreon questions for today. I want to thank our patrons because they have been so supportive. We're getting up close to 100 patrons in just a few months, and I can't even believe that. You all have been so supportive, and I want to thank every one of you. I want to thank all the people that are here listening to Question Time or otherwise that just watch the channel. But the patrons, the support everybody gives has been so great, and I'm just so thankful for that because, as you might know, Google, YouTube has all sorts of demonetization practices. The resources that we spend here in Virtual Legality, some could argue would be better spent going and doing business development for clients at the firm. It would be hard-pressed to argue, but I love doing this. I think it's educational and informational, hopefully entertaining, and so I could not do it without all of you folks, and I'm so thankful. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And on that note, let's talk about a few community questions. I have gotten some super chats. First from Jeremiah Grinston. I love your channel. So how do you think the Activision controversy will affect the video game industry in the long run? Will it change anything? Thank you very much for the super chat. Very generous of you. I would say that it is unlikely to change anything writ large. I think it's easy enough for most companies to look at the Activision issue and say, oh my God, that's so bad, and that's over there, and it's certainly not us. You saw this really day one from notes from folks like Bungie, who of course worked very closely with Activision. Large parts of Activision helped make Destiny 2 what it is. And they immediately said, whoa, we're much better than them. And they had a big long thread about it, one that I discussed at the top of that playlist. So I think it's very easy for industry participants to go and say, it's not us, it's them. As for more than that, I think it does evidence the fact that California in particular has a certain adversarial relationship with the game industry and feels like it's a place where they can make change and do good. You have to watch that because the law isn't really designed necessarily to just make change. You actually have to have a case or controversy against them. But now that we've got EEOC with backing of an investigation from last year, looking like they probably found something that they were satisfied with, you do have the DFEH in California moving against Activision. I think there's a very real possibility that the talent drain, especially from the Blizzard side of Activision, gets to be so much that Blizzard gets dissolved or baked into something else in Activision, and that potentially Activision even changes its name, right? Activision is Activision Blizzard technically right now, and Blizzard has become something of a toxic name for the company. So I think it's a possibility that you see Activision kind of change away from Blizzard as a company. They've obviously had difficulty getting things out. Even Diablo 2, which came out this last week, which I did buy, it's one of my favorite games, wasn't made by Blizzard proper. It was made by Vicarious Visions, who was operating on the other side of the country. If you read quotes in the articles that they talked about Diablo 2 this past week, you heard them say, well, it sounds terrible, and we really are sad for the people that would have been affected by this, but I think they're in New York, and we were making this with our heads down and making Diablo 2, and even within Activision, you see that kind of, oh, that sounds bad, but it wasn't us. And there's no reason to believe that it was. I mean, they really are separated by a whole country. But I think you will start to see Blizzard's intellectual property, whether that's Warcraft or StarCraft or Diablo or Overwatch, spread out to the rest of Activision, and maybe Blizzard becomes something else. So that's what I think is most likely to happen. In the industry at large, probably not. Probably needs a little bit more on the haystack in order to really affect things there. But we also have to keep an open mind. California has accused them of things. The EEOC appears to have accused them of things. We don't know what we don't know in terms of what actually happened. Certainly there's a lot of smoke, and where there's smoke, there's very often fire. But we do have to remember that they haven't proven their case, and we'll see where it goes from there. So thank you very much for the question. And then we have another super chat from Christina Nardone. Thank you very much. Just wanted to say I really enjoy watching your content so far. Thank you. By the way, what are your thoughts on Valve removing old game updates from its Steam client in beta? That's interesting. So I guess I don't know this story that well, so I apologize for that. So if you want to follow up on it, I would appreciate it. But it sounds to me like Valve might be rolling back certain games that you could pick a different version of a game to play as. on your Steam client, which, if that were true, I think is wonderful. I think one of the things that I've often thought about is that I'm a board gamer as well. And I don't think I talk about board games very often, but one of the things I really like about my board games, and this will probably sound funny to many of you, is I have this notion in the back of my head that they can't be patched, they can't be taken away. If I really like this experience, nobody's going to swing in and change them. And there's nothing wrong with patches and updates, and I love playing Destiny as much as the next guy and everything else, but there is a certain amount of peace in knowing this thing that you like to play isn't going anywhere and isn't going to be altered. And I've often thought about the fact that games change so wildly in patches. Now, some less than others, but they can change so wildly that oftentimes you'd like to go back to, excuse me, a vanilla state. And we see Blizzard, in fact, and Activision selling a vanilla version of World of Warcraft for that very reason. If Valve is figuring out a way to make older versions public and available, I think that would be really, really awesome. So thank you for the question. Again, if you have more background on that, I'd happily listen to it. Just flag at Hoeg Law. Again, anybody that wants to ask a question, I'm more than happy to take them and talk about them. It's easiest if you flag at Hoeg Law, just so I know that it's a question. We got Louis here in chat saying, Hoeg, I love you, but I can't lie. I find Colin's politics abhorrent. I don't agree with Colin on his politics necessarily, but I don't agree with, anybody on their politics necessarily. And I think if you go on there, and I'm not recommending that you necessarily, pay his Patreon or anything like that, but if you were to watch my videos, you'd see they take the same tact as Virtual Legality. They try to look at things from both sides, talk about the issues at hand. He had me on talking about Activision Blizzard and some other things. And so you won't see me changing for where I appear there. I always think, my perspective, and different people can have different opinions on this. Reasonable minds can differ, right? Is you try to get what I think is a pretty good philosophy of Reasonable Minds Can Differ in front of more people, in front of more audiences. I always think that's great. So that's what you'll see me do. My appearance on some place is not an endorsement of everything they've ever done. But that's the way I operate, because I think we got a good message here. I think we've got a good, hopefully, way of talking about things. And I like to get them out to more people. But I totally understand where you're coming from. That was not a request to come see me over there. If you don't like it, that is totally fine. But I've been on there. I obviously help the Easy Allies. I'm not interested in closing people off for that kind of thing. So that's what I do. That's my philosophy. And if you don't like that, I totally understand that as well. So that's totally fine. And we have another super chat. Thank you so much, Harrison Kelly. Very generous of you. What's your opinion on the EU's new rule to force USB-C chargers for all phones? Should I hold on to this? Because this is on my list of potential topics for next week. No, this is very generous of you, so I will definitely answer this question. I think that the governments of the world, including the EU, have every right to look at regulating their own economic systems. I do think that we should be at least a little bit circumspect, a little bit cautious about government regulations of things like port requirements on hardware. There's going to be a day where that's going to be outdated. There's going to be a way that regulation is going to be written that might be over-encompassing or under-encompassing. And for the most part, we want the hardware manufacturers to not be looking over their shoulder for every little thing that might occur on their hardware. That said, I think this is a pretty de minimis kind of request, and is designed with good intentions in terms of getting out of proprietary charging and things like that. So I understand how they came to the decision they made. I think in general, they have the right to make that decision if they want, but I do worry about innovation and things like that might get to a better solution that will otherwise be suppressed by an overly regulatory environment. So I want to keep our eyes on that because if they start to dive into more things, the bevel can only be this wide, that kind of thing, we don't generally want arbitrators and bureaucracies who don't have the ability to respond to innovative changes in a marketplace to make those decisions. But there can be, of course, exceptions to that rule. So thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you very much for the questions. Mike B with a super chat. Thank you so much. This is actually a lot of super chats. You guys are very, very generous, and I very much appreciate it. What are your kids' favorite foods? I liked it when you said the A word. I liked it when you swore. Well, you know, occasionally we do that here. We do try to keep this a very family-friendly channel, as you've probably noted. It's not really a lot of effort for me. It's not regular for me in my practice, although certainly working in corporate law, you hear variance on every little bit of language. One of my kids' favorite foods. Well, one of my kids really only likes to eat noodles. So they really love all kinds of noodles. So they know more about the noodle names, the official noodle names, than I do. And so they're actually always requesting different kinds of noodles. And then my other child is like a gourmand. She likes all sorts of stuff that is way beyond me. And she watches, Top Chef with her mom and all that kind of stuff. And she's constantly trying things. We just had a roast we've never had before that she tried and loved. And so I think her palate is both more refined and more generous than mine, which is always interesting. As a parent, one of the things that is not expected, at least wasn't expected by me, is watching your kids that are, just little babies and little toddlers for a long time exceed you in certain respects. And so my youngest can now bake and cook much better than I ever could, and has taste and, pinches various spices and things into other things and makes delicious foods in a way that I never, ever could. But she's also a big fan of video games, which I could not be happier with. I see a little bit of USB-C conversation on the EU regulations. I think, you are going to be fully in the reasonable minds can differ zone there. But yeah. Does anybody have any questions on Epic versus Apple? It feels like I've spent a quarter of my life working on that case. As a side note, while I wait for more questions, it's pretty funny. A number of you asked me this, and it was actually entirely right. So the Epic versus Apple, the decision video that I did, I guess it was 2 Fridays ago, was 2.5 hours long. I had prepped for it as well. And my voice was actually gone for the entire rest of the weekend. And this cough that you've heard me cough a couple of times now is basically from then. And it's funny because I've talked for that long before, but it just got me. I think I was animated enough in that video that which I believe is the longest video on the channel, just wound up knocking off some of my vocal status there. So that was interesting. Let's see here. Gecko Gamer with a super chat. Thank you so much. Can you explain what exactly happens when a big company goes bankrupt? Unfortunately, I can't, primarily because there's a number of different ways that they can go bankrupt, and there's a number of different reasons that you might find that somebody is bankrupt. You can be bankrupt, for instance, for just not having the right amount of revenue to pay your debts as they become due. That's bankruptcy in certain definitions in certain jurisdictions. And certainly jurisdictional questions matter here, right? Bankruptcy looks a lot different in a number of different countries, even in a number of different areas of those countries than it might in other places. So that comes into play. But in general, when you go bankrupt, there are two things that can happen. One is that it's just the end of the day. You're never going to make this thing work, and you're going to liquidate your assets and sell off those assets. You're going to pay off your debt first. If there's still more money than the debt, then you could potentially squeeze some small amount of it out to the equity holders. That's the order: debt first, equity second. In the other version of bankruptcy, you've got something that you think works. You can make small amounts of revenue. There's an operational way to make it happen, but you've got too much debt. You've got some other big anchor weighing you down, and you can go to the court and say, look, here's how this all looks. We can make this work, but we need to get some kind of redress. We need to get out from under this anchor. And then the court will sometimes help you, generally speaking, with the approval of your creditors who have to get some kind of money on the dollar. That's what you see when you have, your car companies go bankrupt, or your cities go bankrupt, and they don't go anywhere. It's that what's agreed to is, we understand we're not going to get paid dollar for dollar on what you owe us. We're going to accept something lesser and potentially some other assets or some other benefit. And we want you to survive, because it's bad if you don't survive. And sometimes that can become a political question, and we don't want to get into all that. But that's what happens in bankruptcy, is you either sell everything and you're liquidating out and everybody gets screwed equally, or you're trying to figure out a plan that can make your company survive by selling some of your assets, spinning off something that has a lot of debt to maybe somewhere that they can use it better, et cetera, et cetera. So it's unfortunately a very complicated question, and one of those, like copyright or intellectual property, that's facts and circumstances based, and you'd want to base it around what you're actually looking at the time. Bankruptcy, very, very complicated, and certainly if you came into my office asking me about it, we'd be sending you to a bankruptcy lawyer. That is one of those areas where that's a specific practice of law. It's not me. But thank you very much for the question. Let's see here. Flag me with Hoeg Law if you got questions. You don't have to use Super Chat, but I do appreciate it. Does the whole line of "this is not legal advice, talk to your own lawyer" actually do anything? Do you need to say it, or is it like no copyright infringement intended? Also, where does it come from? Okay, so here's the thing. If you're my client and I talk to you about a legal question you have about your own facts and circumstances, then we enter into a relationship that is governed by, among other things, the ethics rules in which the lawyer is practicing, which means, as a for instance, if I give you formal legal advice and you act on it and it turns out badly, you could potentially sue your lawyer for malpractice. Now, I have malpractice insurance, as every lawyer that practices does or should. And that's one thing, but I'm out here on YouTube talking about news items. And so you might not see this disclaimer from other people because they consider it obvious enough. But when I talk about the NDA at Games Workshop, or I talk about Epic versus Apple, that is not designed to create an attorney-client relationship between you or I, because I don't know the facts and circumstances of your situation. And as we've talked about, that's going to matter a whole lot. So one of the things the ethics rules say is you shouldn't give legal advice to someone before you've ascertained their situation. And as you might suspect, a tweet from somebody asking me a question is not enough to ascertain the specifics of their situation. So, if you go to my Patreon and you look at this tier, question time, and I go and I solicit questions every month when I do this video, I say in there, ethics rules prohibit me from talking about your legal situation. And that's the way it works. That's how the disclaimer on the end of the video came to be, which is just to say, hey, this is educational, informational, hopefully entertaining, but it's not talking about your particular problem with a lease that you are entered into for your dog grooming business or what have you, right? That if you want to have that kind of relationship, you email me, you call me up, you go to my contact form, you do whatever. We decide whether or not we're going to engage each other, you as client, me as lawyer, and each side gets to kind of make sure that that's a good fit for them. And then we do formal legal advice, because that's an important relationship. It's almost like a doctor. You need to be able to tell them about your warts and everything else. And you don't do it on Twitter or in comments to YouTube. So that's what that's for. Whether or not it works depends a little bit on what I do. If I did a video where somebody asked me a question about their legal situation and then I decided to answer it as I would if they were sitting in my office, no, that disclaimer is not going to get me out of it. No, hashtag tweets not legal advice wouldn't get me out of it if I'm directly giving them legal advice against those rules. But what the disclaimer does do is, if anybody thinks they're on the margin, if there's a gray area case, I'm trying to make it clear for them that this isn't that. And that's why it exists. And I apologize if it's a little legalese. I tried to make it fun, but that's why it's there. And thank you for asking the question. Louis says, look, I'm totally going to cite Hoeg Law videos in court someday. I do look forward to that. It was one of those things. I was reading Epic versus Apple, being like, I wonder if a virtual legality appears in here. That would be cool. Although it would also be terrifying. I get called and contacted by subjects of my videos often enough that you might be surprised. And so it's one of those things where I always try to treat people fairly anyway. But then I'm always cognizant of the fact that there's a very good chance that the subject matter of my videos is going to check it out. I really don't have any doubt that Epic has seen some of my videos. Tim Sweeney's following me on Twitter now. He sees it every time I put one up. It's one of those things where you just kind of get used to it. But I tell you, the first time that it happened, and I think all of them have basically asked to be off the record, so I won't name names. But the first time that it happened, I was very, very surprised, and I was expecting to get yelled at or something along those lines. But basically, everyone has, even if they disagree with me, been very courteous in their communications with me. But it is interesting to see how far this content gets. Are you going to take on the Evergrande story? It is honestly one of the most interesting things I've seen in a while. I might look into it. I got to be honest. I'm not a financial guy. I don't know enough about how that default's working. If you aren't familiar, Evergrande is a Chinese company that looks like it's going to go under and take a lot of investors with it. I might look into it, but I also might recommend, finding sourcing from somebody that's a little bit more financially inclined because, everybody has their own expertises, and I might know enough to be dangerous by the time I get done reading that. Let's see. My question was prompted by me reminding that THQ went bankrupt in a bit of a spectacular manner. Yeah. And you saw what happened there, which was that the THQ name got purchased as something that was useful. That's the assets being liquidated. And then once the name is purchased, you can essentially claim that you are that company because names are what you are, right? And so that's what happened is that they went under, they sold the assets. Let's see. Hello, Hoeg Law. Do you perhaps know Legal Eagle? You are the second lawyer that I know of on YouTube. I think there's like 5 or 6 of us that I would consider doing this on a fairly regular basis. I do not know Legal Eagle. I have appeared on his channel, I think 3 or 4 times. He regularly cites us, which is very, very cool of him. Excuse me. But I know him only as internet friends, and he ribs me on Twitter from time to time. But certainly, I'm always interested in doing collaborations and working with other folks. Again, because I still operate under the presumption, more views, more audience, the more folks that I can talk to with my philosophy and how virtual legality works, the better. And I think a lot of lawyers on YouTube are doing good work. I think some of them are not doing as good work as others, but that it's great that there is a place where we can have these conversations and hopefully educate folks on the unfortunate fact being that what's reported on in stories is very often pretty far from what actually happened, especially from a legal kind of basis, as we saw with Epic versus Apple and the immediate articles that came out, in which I was like, wow. Let's see. Hoeg Law, do you think we'll see more streamers leave Twitch for YouTube gaming in the near future? That's an interesting question. Twitch has the advantage of, it appears from the outside at least, I don't participate in Twitch, having a bigger audience, having an audience that is more willing to spend money on memberships or whatever else gets the actual streamers money. And that's always going to be most important over the terms and conditions, over the treatment, over anything else. You got a big audience, you got a lot of people, then you're going to get some folks making you content. In fact, this is Epic v. Apple, right? This is why Tim Sweeney is so upset about Apple's restrictions, whether or not they're legal. It's because they have 1 billion users, and he wants to get access to those 1 billion users, so he's suing over it. But, when I do a video about Twitch's terms and conditions, Twitch's NMPA agreement, which is just, I don't think is very good. And going from there, I think on the margins, which is kind of a term I use a lot, but from economics, it's like there is a curve, and the people that are most likely to leave might well leave. This might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. They might just go over to YouTube gaming. So I think there'll be some, but it would surprise me if it's anytime soon, because Twitch has such a first mover advantage, has that kind of backing. If YouTube decides to really hurl its resources at it, including Google's, you might see some significant change. But as for right now, I don't think so. Have you ever looked into the legality of Proton wine? Looks like BattleEye and EAC are now supporting it, so it might blow up. I understood some of those words. I believe Proton is like an engine. That's what the Steam Deck is using, right? And BattleEye and EAC are anti-cheat mechanisms. So I don't know the legality of it. Generally speaking, you'd be falling under kind of the reverse engineering stuff that's okay, functionality, I think. But again, I know less than enough to be very dangerous on this, so I apologize for not having more specifics there. But for the most part, you might get challenged, especially when something blows up, right? We can talk about the overall precepts of virtual legality or just legality in general, which is when there is a deep pocket, when something becomes successful, folks come out of the woodwork that might have a claim. And so if somebody thinks they have a claim on something, that might happen when it blows up. But as of right now, I don't think there's an issue. I never heard of Legal. Might want to check him out when I can. Yeah, he does. He does really, really polished stuff. And he crossed 1 million subscribers, I think, in the last few months. And I think he just crossed 2 million last month. So, I mean, that's certainly a good growth pattern. Love to see it. Would love to have it. But I think he does some good work. He does some pop culture stuff. He's a little bit more politically oriented than me, which you might like. But he dives into the politics questions more often than I do. Hoeg Law, how could one get into trouble for plagiarizing oneself, referencing your video on the Destiny 2 music creator? Well, I mean, I talk about it in that video, but it's essentially the fact that he made the stuff as what would appear from the outside, again, not party to that contract, a work made for hire, which means that, at least according to the law, he was never the creator. He was never the author of that intellectual property because he was paid for it. He was paid to make it. If you're interested in work made for hire, you're really going to be interested in today's video after question time here, because we're going to be talking about works made for hire, not just in 1978, not just the current Copyright Act, but the 1909 Copyright Act, where you know things get real. So we're going to be talking about works made for hire. We're going to be talking about revocation and termination rights of a copyright holder, how assignment differs from works made for hire, and why you're not going to have any stoppage of the MCU or Spider-Man in any event. So please check out that video when it goes up, probably an hour after this one ends. Hoeg Law, becoming a lawyer has made you lose too much of your hope in humanity? Question mark. Sounds like a statement, but has it made me lose too much of my hope in humanity? You know, I honestly think it's pretty easy to do that. And I've seen a lot of my colleagues and other lawyers have that happen to them. No, I haven't lost my faith in humanity. I'm an optimist. You can probably tell I'm a positive person. So no, being a lawyer has made me more aware of people's proclivities and has, exposed me to some folks that I thought were pretty good, doing some pretty shady stuff when it, advantages them. And it's easy to kind of see that. But no, for the most part, and I get to control my book of business, so this is part of that as well. People, I think, a lot of them are generally good, trying to make their way in the world, trying to do good things, trying to make money, sure, but aren't out there to just steal and rob and take advantage of people. So overall, I maintain my optimism. That's who I am. So thankfully, law hasn't driven that out of me. Although you do find me doing a lot of YouTubing. So maybe I do something else for a little while to separate from transaction negotiations from time to time. At Hoeg Law, I also meant to ask you, do you think they'll bring up the Activision insider trading when Bungie left, and for the developers that make money, but not the big, what do you think will happen to them? I don't know that they have a great case for insider trading. We're talking about the SEC investigation. I think they're definitely focused on the disclosure concepts. But I don't know. Bungie leaving, there was some complaints, there was some noise made around that and around investors not having enough information about it. The thing about a regulatory body's investigation is that once you're in their spotlight, they can go in a lot of different directions, which is why you don't want to be in their spotlight. But it would surprise me if it expanded to that level, but it might be that Activision just becomes something that everybody targets. We don't know. Thank you for the question. Hoeg Law, Proton is a graphics API for Windows to Linux, and Wine is the Windows emulation layer for Linux. Yeah, see, I'd only seen Proton referenced as helping to make the Steam Deck work. So yeah, I knew it had something to do with Linux. I appreciate the clarification. But in general, yeah, making those kind of support structures for other things is distinct from something like you saw me do the video on Grand Theft Auto 5, which is itself specific content, or Grand Theft Auto 3, I apologize. So for the most part, things like that, and I don't know enough on the specifics here, so please take it with a grain of salt, are going to be okay under the kind of reverse engineering of functionality and connectivity concepts that exist in American law. But I know enough to be dangerous. Don't take that for solid. And certainly if it does become very, very popular, other folks might come out with claims against it. Hey, Hoeg Law, thanks for changing my life. Ever since I got on your Patreon, I became semi-relevant on the internet. That's all I am, is semi-relevant on the internet. So you've matched me in one fell swoop. Well, thank you for supporting us on Patreon. I very much appreciate it. It is very generous for everybody that elects to do so, and I am so thankful for that. And I'm glad that you got quoted on the internet. I think Tim followed you right after supporting the Patreon, right? At Hoeg Law, I'm not sure if you answered this before, but do you think that Elgato could potentially have a valid trademark claim against Valm's Steam Deck being too similar in name to their Stream Deck? It's possible. It's possible. See, your issue, though, is that Valve's Steam existed before Stream Deck. streaming is just descriptive. Stream Deck is a valid trademark, I would imagine, although, again, knows enough to be dangerous. And then adding deck, is it designed to confuse? Do you think that they're trying to get some kind of Elgato benefit from that? It's one of those things where you could sue. You could send a letter and say, give us $35,000, whatever it might be, and you're happy with it. Or it could be nothing. I do have to admit that when you're typing in Steam Deck, it's easy to type in Stream Deck and you can get into bouncing places on like a Google search, but it's not likely in my opinion, but who knows? The trademark office could do whatever it wants on that kind of stuff. Let's see, Spider-Man Far From Home video with seeing how that movie was affected by both Disney and Sony when that situation was happening. It's not happening anymore, but you might find it interesting. Channel Spider-Man Far From Home video. Okay, maybe. That might be what you're talking about with respect to the Spider-Man characters. If you haven't been in the chat this whole time, I actually was a little bit late to start today because I was putting the finishing touches on a surprise Saturday virtual legality on the Spider-Man character issue, Works Made for Hire, and the earlier Copyright Act stuff. So that will be up as soon as I get it uploaded after this video is done. So you can check that out there. Let's see, chat, hit that like button. Sure, yeah, hit the like button. Tell folks that we're having this conversation. That's always appreciated, always awesome. Likes are always great. Have you heard of Second Thought on YouTube from Nerdstalgic? I've not. So that might be one that I check out. And it feels like we're coming to the end of community questions. We'll go for another couple minutes, so get them in now if you have them at Hoeg Law. Super chat, anything else that kind of highlights it in my window is very, very helpful. Otherwise, I think we're going to be finishing off in September. If you're into college football, my Michigan Wolverines play Rutgers today. Go Wolverines. We are undefeated. And, let's look at this. I'm clicking on the wrong tab. Speaking of Spider-Man, that was not a request for you to subscribe and tell your friends on this, but hey, there you go. Then we're going to stay undefeated hopefully through today, and I have to take my wins where I can get them because it's been hard to be a Michigan Wolverine football fan for about 20 years or so. What was the weirdest law I ever had to cite in a case? See, now this is an important question because I think some of you know this, some of you don't. I am not a litigator. I don't cite things in a case. I don't file briefs. I am a corporate attorney that helps get companies formed, funded, and work on their contracts. And then if a dispute arises, I work with a number of litigators that I hand off that dispute to and say, wow, hopefully I wrote that contract to cover whatever is happening right now. And I've had pretty good luck on that in the course of my career. But yeah, in terms of weirdest laws I've cited, I have done briefs, I have done research memos. A lot of those relate to things like securities laws, where we've had to go way back in time and quote court cases and things like that. When I was first starting out my career, I was working on Daubert motions, to be very legalese, but it was about the nature of the relevant experience of expert witnesses at trial. And I created something like a 52-page brief on the nature of that for Michigan and Michigan law. I also did a very long memo that traced the origin of what were then called Indian gaming laws, which were about Native American casinos, essentially, and how they were allowed to function separate from federal gaming laws, and went through that, which leads to an interesting side story. One of the firms that I worked at once had an internet safety protocol, a little puppy that comes up and says you're not allowed to go here, which never really works for law firms, and they had to get rid of it. But for the time, it would prevent me from going and looking at IGN at lunch or something like that, because the internet safety thing had determined that those were gaming. And they are, of course, gaming in a certain respect, but they were concerned about us gambling on the law firm computers and working on gambling things. And so we had to tell them that was a problem. And then it became even more of a problem when I needed to research a gaming memo, which took me a lot of time. And is one of the reasons why I became known in a couple of the law firms I worked with as the kind of academic lawyer, the guy that would go and do research with footnotes and things like that and make essentially law review articles for purposes of the firm's use. And wound up with me working on a treatise talking about the Michigan Business Corporation Act for about 10 years. You can see my name as the author of the supplements there from, I'd have to look at it, 2008 to 2018, maybe, something along those lines. And you can see that. But yeah, in terms of citing things, when you go deep into legal research, I probably cited weirder things here in virtual legality than I do in my day job. As always, what are you currently watching, playing? ActRaiser, y'all. I tweeted that out, and some people don't like the graphic styling. I don't blame them for the new ActRaiser, but ActRaiser, if you aren't familiar with it, is a 2D arcade side-scrolling platform action game crossed with a city-building resource management, populous type god building game where you use lightning bolts and earthquakes and things to help reshape the land. And it was out in the 90s on the Super Nintendo, always one of my favorites. And they just shadow dropped a complete version of it during the Nintendo Direct on, what day was that? Thursday. So I got that. I'm playing that. Love it. I'm also playing through Kana. I think she pronounces it Kana. People yelled at me for saying Kenya. And that's very pretty, but ultimately I think pretty shallow. And my kids are playing Slime Rancher. But I'm playing a ton of stuff. I also am really enjoying Tales of Iron. I'm really enjoying a game called Fist, where you're a cybernetic bunny person. I'm still playing through Tales of Arise. I'm playing Eastward with my daughter on the Switch. So I'm playing a lot of stuff. I really think indie games have been fantastic. And of course, I just got Death Stranding Director's Cut yesterday, which I really have only barely started. Death Stranding, if you don't know, was my, trying to get the years right here, 2019 Game of the Year. And I know it's very divisive, but it might be one of my favorite games ever made. I might make a video on it. Some people have asked me to do that because I just find it absolutely amazing. And I think a lot of that amazement comes from how it crescendos in its final act, and all the toil and tribulation that have led you to that are useful for making that all work. And so I think there is a difference between folks that have played Death Stranding and didn't like the toil so much and dropped out of it, and people that made it all the way to the end, because it does such a great job of hitting those highs that I look for in any kind of material that I'm enjoying. So Death Stranding, couldn't recommend it more, but you have to know it's arduous, and that arduousness is part of the story that it's telling. So playing a lot of stuff, but yes, ActRaiser, absolutely thoroughly enjoying it. It does have graphics that are interesting. They made some interesting choices, but as a game, it still stands the test of time. So with that all said, thank you so much for the patrons that asked questions, for everybody that commented here in the community, for the super chats, absolutely, but just for everybody that participated and continues to support the channel. I could not be more grateful to all of you. Have a great weekend. Have a great September day. Go Michigan Wolverines. And I will see you in the next episode of Virtual Legality. Thanks so much.